Hello everyone, you're very welcome to Trocare's event at the Féile this year entitled Standing Her Ground. We're delighted to be back this year. My name is Jeannie McCann and I work in Trocare's campaigns team. Today we will begin by watching two short documentaries on women human rights defenders and then have a discussion with the documentary maker, my colleague Emmet Sheerin. The first documentary is Sumud, Everyday Resistance, which examines life under Israeli military occupation in the West Bank through the stories of Palestinian women. The documentary takes its title from the Palestinian concept, Sumud, which literally translates as steadfastness. The documentary speaks to the Palestinians' steadfast commitment to their homeland and their determination to vindicate their rights. Then we'll watch Women in Their Place, which is a short documentary about women in Honduras who are defending their communities and environment from abuse and big business. In doing so, they face criminalisation, assault, and even murder. Their courage is not just an act of defiance against corporate greed, it is an act of defiance against the very system that tries to keep women in their place. So first, we'll watch Sumud.
أنا نوال بركات من قرية النبي سموئيل، فسميتها القرية المنسية. إذا كان الواحد بده يزرع ممنوع، بده يحط شيك ممنوع، تسجيل ممنوع، يعني من كل النواحي ممنوع ممنوع ممنوع. وأهل القرية هنا بتضيق أو حصار يعني مش طبيعي. كل الحياة بشكل عام يعني. قريتنا كانت جميع بيوتنا حوالين الجامع. في ال71 أطلعوا قرار إنه هاي محمية طبيعية، فهدوا بيوتنا وجابونا على بيوت قديمة بعيد عن منطقة الجامع. هاي مكان بيوتنا القديمة، وهاي أصلها هي البيوت القديمة بس ما تبقى منها. بيحكوا إنها منطقة أثرية، هي مش أثرية. إحنا البيوت اللي عايشين فيها تحت مش بيوتنا الأصلية هنا. طبعا هاي الصورة واضحة وكل أهل القرية عارفينها، هي محاولة تهجيرنا من القرية.
The issue of forced displacement and colonization and institutionalized discrimination, which are very prevalent within the Israeli legal regime. All of these three are considered war crimes under international humanitarian law. All the Israeli policies are designed to do one thing, and that is to continue the forcible displacement of the Palestinian people in order to be able to control the greatest amount of land with the smallest amount of Palestinians residing on that land.
فصارت الحياة صعبة جداً.
أنا اسمي سوسن محمود حمامدي من منطقة مفقرة. يعني منطقة مفقرة من ضمن مسافة رياض جنوب جبل الخليل، تتكون من 17 عائلة، عدد أفرادها 150 فرد. نحن اليوم في القرن ال21، لكن للأسف الشديد منطقة مفقرة في العصر الحجري. مثلا إنه بنعيش في الكهوف والخيام، ما فيش شبكة كهرباء، ما فيش خط مي. منطقة الفقر يعني من زمن جدودنا، يعني تورثناه زي ميراث أخذناه من من جدنا. زي ما بتعرف يعني منطقة الفقر أول معاناة كانت إلا في سنة 2000 لما رحلونا الجيش من هاي المنطقة وأصبحنا لاجئين. احنا في 6 شهور لما ثبتنا إنه هاي الأرض إلنا، رجعنا تقريبا بعد 6 شهور. الحياة حلوة هنا. المعنى اللي بيعنوا يعني كيف التعامل مع الجيش، يعني كل يوم بنواجه مشاكل. يعني حتى يعني رعاة الأغنام يعني بيتعرضوا للضرب، بيتعرضوا للاعتقال. حتى ربات البيوت بيتعرضوا للضرب.
طبعا من الصعوبات اللي بيواجهوها جميع أهالي القرية اللي هي البطالة اللي لا تحتمل من قبل من التضيق اللي بيعملوه الاحتلال علينا، لدرجة إنه صار نسبة البطالة عندنا في القرية هان 90% بالنسبة للشباب. لكن داخل القدس ممنوع إحنا نوصل القدس. مراقبة من خلال كاميرا بفرجيكم إياها، هي لقدام شوي. كاميرا للمنطقة تقريبا 9 قرى حوالينا، راصدين تحركات القرى كلها اللي حوالي. يعني صارت عندنا هنا انه الشباب اللي حكيتهم بالشرطة راقبوهم بالكاميرا تفاتوا البيوت. طبعا هم كانوا رايحين يشتغلوا مش رايحين يلعبوا. فيش بيت الا انحبس لهم يا الاب يا الابناء، وبنفس الوقت كمان دفع غرامات وكفالات، تطويق للبيت، هدم، برضه تفتيش دائم. هذا اللي بنص الليل كمان عملوا ذعر للاطفال. يعني في منهم في طفل من عمره 7 سنين صار في راسه شيب، 7 سنين صار في راسه شيب، حتى يحاولوا يطلعونا من البلد، بس احنا مش رح نطلع.
Another policy that they use is home demolitions, because as you know, if your home is demolished, then you have no place to reside.
هم مختار لهدم البيت، يهدموا البيت يعني تبعنا. والله أنا كنت قاعد في هالدار حاضر، وما أدري ما فطنت إلا هالبلتاد ومعاهم تبعين التنظيم هذول. كاتي الحين أنا جيت من هان وله قاعد هان وصور الدار وجاب حط اختار هان وحط عليه حجر.
طيب هو بيسألك إن لو هدوا الدار شو يعني شو بيعني لك إن
شو بطالع بدينا يعني؟ احنا بنقدر نمنعهم لا يهدوا؟ نقدرش.
The state of Israel began using these policies way before its creation in 1948, continues to use them today. Unfortunately, one of the main issues is the lack of accountability by the international community towards the state of Israel. So failing to hold Israel accountable also makes the international community complicit.
يعني للأسف الشديد يعني كل هذا مجرد تحسه كأنه حلم، زي اللي وقع في المي وبده يطلع لكن ما بيعرف يسبح.
Many people face extreme difficulties. Many people do not have the basic infrastructure or access to services in order to be able to live a decent quality of life. And so the actual tenacity of staying in these areas, even though it is to the detriment of the quality of life of the Palestinian people, is one form of resistance. Existence is resistance, just sumud.
الواحد، لكن احنا حتى يثبت صمودنا هان داخل القريه. انا مصممه يعني على موضوع النساء وعلى المشاريع هاي اللي بتثبت اهل القريه داخل القريه. احنا مش بحاجه انه نطلع برا القريه، عندنا مجال وعندنا اراضي وعندنا هذا، بدنا نستغل الوضع داخل القريه من خلال مشاريعنا الاقتصاديه اللي داخل القريه، حتى شغل الشباب والصبايا والستات حتى الاطفال، يعني من خلال هاي الاشياء اللي يحسوا انه الحياه مريحه، حتى لو انها مش مريحه بس احنا رح نحسس منها مريحه.
والله ما بنطلع، هذه أرضنا وين بدنا نطلع منها؟ والله يكر كل يوم يكر ما بنطلع منها.
اكيد.
وين نخلي شجرنا وارضنا نطلع منها؟ طلعش.
فأنا اشتركت مع مؤسسة من إسرائيل تعال نضل السلام يحكوا لهم. حكيت لهم إن أنا بدي أعمل زي ورشات عمل للأطفال هنا، إني أصير أجمعهم عندي أعطيهم يرسموا أعطيهم أشياء. فحكيت لهم طيب أنا جاهز. ففعلا يعني جابوا لي أوراق للرسم وجابوا علب ألوان وألعاب 5 جمعة من الساعة 2 للساعة 5 المساء ونحن مجتمعين. بطبيعة كنت بس أشرح لهم يعني شو يعني الأشياء اللي بيحبوها، يعني مثلا كنت أشاركهم يعني في عندي كمان قصص يعني بيحكي عن فلسطين زمان كمان يعني في 48 وكيف كنت أحكي لهم عنهم كيف يعني تعملهم زي تخفيف يعني ضغط نفسي شيء زي هيك.
And so it becomes a day-to-day struggle. But you will still find within Palestinian communities that people still continue to go on with their daily lives. Children will continue to go to school even if they are being harassed by colonizers or settlers who are living in nearby Israeli Jewish colonies. They will continue to study. When the electricity is out, they will light candles. Women will still continue to take care of their homes, even if their homes happen to be, something that has been donated from the European Union, a little trailer, or even if their homes, many of the homes may be just a shack, and the ground is not even, it's dirt. And so they will continue to take care of their homes and clean their homes and make sure that if they have a visitor, they have something to offer them. Palestinians continue to smile every day.
نحن مش مطلعين يعني مثلا الجانب المادي، يعني في بعضهم تحكي معهم فكرتي انك انت فاتح ايدك، لا انت فاتح ايدك ولا انت فاتح مصلية. يعني نحن الحمد لله طالما عند الواحد 10 رسمة غنيان يعرف يتأكد انه مش فقير. لكن نحن بدنا نقولهم دعم، يعني دعم صمود، قلنا فيها انك تيجي تشاركنا في ألمنا، يعني بصير عنا يعني كل يوم بصير لنا شيء، بس لانه ما فيش لنا توثيق، ما فيش لنا صحافة ولا شيء، يعني ما حدش بيعرف.
نحن بنعرف انه بنقدر نعيش حياة ثانية اسهل من هاي، لكن احنا مش سهل انه الواحد يتنازل عن بلده، فمع صعوباتها احنا متحملين، وكل ما بيضيقوا علينا بصير عندنا اصرار وتحمل اكثر. بحكي لي انا زي السمكة اذا طلعتيها من البحر بموت، انا برا لبنان بسمى البحر الشعبي.
لمين نتركها؟
That was Sumud, Everyday Resistance, and now we'll go straight into the next film, Woman in Their Place.
Located in the heart of Central America, Honduras is a country of immense natural wealth, with lush forests, fertile land, and vast mineral deposits. Despite such riches, the history of Honduras is marked by massive inequality. Today, a powerful minority control most of the land and other resources in the country, while the majority live in poverty. Since a coup in 2009, which overthrew the country's democratically elected president, this inequality has worsened. A succession of right-wing governments have made agribusiness, energy projects, and mining a keystone of the country's economic strategy, putting corporate greed above the needs of the country's poorest people. Large-scale agricultural and mining projects have led to environmental destruction, violent evictions, and the denial of basic human rights. Those most impacted are often Honduras indigenous communities who for centuries have faced discrimination and the dispossession of their ancestral lands. Responding to ongoing abuse by big business, indigenous communities are making a stand in defense of their territories. For this, they are paying a high price. There are few places more dangerous on earth to defend land and the environment. Since the coup, more than 120 people, many of them indigenous leaders, have been murdered in Honduras for resisting land grabs and environmental damage by corporations. But this is only part of the story. The exploitation of natural resources exacerbates another deeply rooted problem in Honduras: the treatment of women. Discrimination against women is pervasive in Honduras. Women are underrepresented in political and economic spheres. Girls face significant barriers to quality education, and there are many obstacles to access proper health care. Most alarmingly, violence against women is rampant. In fact, Honduras has one of the highest murder rates of women in the world outside of a war zone. These problems are intensified, especially for indigenous women, in the context of land grabbing and resource exploitation. As corporations steal and destroy indigenous land, the dangers faced by indigenous women increase, making them particularly vulnerable to displacement, sexual violence, domestic abuse, and further impoverishment. However, indigenous women are not simply victims of abuse. In the face of inequality, they remain resilient. In many cases, they are the ones leading the struggle to defend their land and environment from exploitation. In doing so, they not only confront corporate power, they challenge what it means to be a woman in Honduras.
Bueno, como mujer, como madre que soy de 5 hijos, he aprendido muchas cosas a luchar en defensa de nuestro territorio, de nuestros bienes, porque la vida de nosotros está en este bosque, está en los ríos, está en toda nuestra naturaleza, pues.
Angela is a member of the Tolupanes people, one of Honduras' most marginalized indigenous communities. For years, they have had to fight to remain on their ancestral land in the face of illegal logging and mining operations.
Entonces, nos oponemos a toda esta corrupción que hay en nuestro país.
Alison Pineda is a Tolupanes activist at risk of imprisonment for attempting to stop the exploitation of the forest.
Bueno, nos criminalizan por estar ahí. Estábamos en una toma, estábamos deteniendo los camiones para que no pasaran.
¿Los camiones que llevaban?
Los camiones que iban cargados de madera. Y bueno, nos culpan de que nosotros fuimos los que destruimos los vidrios de los camiones, que no fue así. Pero el Ministerio Público dice que nosotros somos y no fuimos nosotros. Nosotros estábamos en una marcha pacífica, porque nunca los hemos agredido a ellos. Al contrario, ellos nos han agredido a nosotros.
y le da cuáles son sus temores que puede resultar de este juicio.
Sí, me da temor porque las leyes son pagadas por empresarios, entonces da temor de que nos vayan a arrestar, a dejarnos ahí solo porque ellos pagan cierta cantidad de dinero para tenernos ahí.
Criminalisation is only one of the tactics used to silence human rights and environmental defenders. They face intimidation, physical violence, and murder. Over the past 2 decades, around 100 Tolupanes activists have been killed in the struggle to protect their land and forests. On the 25th February 2019, Salomon Matute and his son, Juan Samael Matute, became two of the most recent victims when they were shot dead on their way to work. This pattern of intimidation and violence against Tolupanes activists is similar to realities faced by other indigenous communities in Honduras. Ana Miriam is a member of the Lenca people, Honduras' largest indigenous group. She is a leading voice against the building of a hydroelectric dam on the Chinacla River. Ana's community have serious concerns about the negative impact the dam would have on their access to water. Since beginning her public opposition to the dam, Ana's life has been in serious danger. On the 22nd October 2015, she was badly beaten when a group of 30 soldiers, police and armed civilians forced their way into her home.
Cuando fue el ataque, bueno, fue un ataque bien difícil porque mis niños los sacaron por la fuerza de la casa, los aventaron afuera. Y a mí me maltrataron, que hasta 11 días estuve en hospitales. Fue la embarazada de la niña hasta que ver si se salvaba a esa niña. Pero vale más la voluntad, porque miren, no, yo aquí estoy. Entonces nosotros nos hemos propuesto que a lo que los toque defender lo que estamos defendiendo.
This is Democracy Now!, democracynow.org, The War and Peace Report. I'm Amy Goodman as we turn now to Honduras, which is still reeling from last week's assassination of Berta Cáceres, one of the country's most well-known indigenous environmental leaders. She was gunned down in her home early Thursday, less than a year after she won the prestigious Goldman Environmental Prize.
An indigenous Lenca activist, Cáceres was murdered for protesting against the construction of the Agua Zarca Dam on the sacred Hualcarque River. The dam threatened the supply of water, food, and medicine for hundreds of Lenca people. As one of Honduras' most prominent activists, Berta not only dedicated her life to protecting the environment from exploitation and destruction, she also championed women's rights. Berta's legacy is one of inspiration to other women, to take a stand against big business and gender inequality. Andrea Valladares works for the Honduran Center for the Promotion of Community Development. It is an NGO providing legal and technical assistance to indigenous farmers that are defending their land against mining and hydroelectric schemes.
A mí en lo personal, cuando estaba en la universidad, admiraba mucho a nuestra lideresa Berta Cáceres. Su lucha incansable se llevó hasta las últimas instancias. Bueno, creo que a lo largo de la historia las mujeres han sido víctimas de mucho machismo, incluso en las mismas comunidades indígenas. Entonces siento que ellas han agarrado ese auge y esa fuerza de decir, no, yo también puedo ser una defensora, yo también puedo ir enfrente de mi pueblo. Son mujeres muy fuertes, mujeres sin miedo, mujeres que se enfrentan a cualquier cosa por su familia, por su futuro y más que todo por sus tierras.
Bueno, yo le diría a otras mujeres que no tengamos miedo. O sea, por el hecho de ser mujer, cuando nos discriminan, porque dicen, bueno, esas mujeres deben de estar en su casa buscando qué hacer, haciendo esto. No, nosotras también podemos estar ahí y tenemos el derecho de estar ahí.
The corporate race for natural resources has put millions of people around the world at risk of abuse. This is especially the case for women from indigenous or ethnic minority communities who often have less secure rights to land. Honduras is not unique in this regard. However, while big business continues to operate with impunity in Honduras, the drive for profit will further escalate the abuse of land and life, particularly the lives of poor indigenous women. Despite the odds, though, women are making a stand for a more just and sustainable Honduras. In doing so, they face criminalization, assault, and even death. Their courage in protecting indigenous land from exploitation is not just an act of defiance against corporate greed. It is an act of defiance against the very system that seeks to keep women in their place.
En el futuro definitivamente creo que la mujer va a tomar un rol en Honduras como lideresas y líderes. Ya no podemos ser un presidente, sino que podemos ser una presidenta. La mujer está haciendo un cambio radical en Honduras. Creo que qué mejor cosa que esa.
That was Women in Their Place. We're now going to have a discussion with the documentary maker, Emmet Sheerin. Emmet works as a campaign's outreach officer for Trocaire in Maynooth. He has a particular interest in using documentary film to raise awareness about the issue of global justice. He has written and directed a number of short documentaries for Trocaire, but also produces his own independent short documentaries. He has a BA in Media Studies and an MA in Advocacy and Activism. Emmet, thanks for joining us. To start off with, can you tell us about how and why you made Sumud Everyday Resistance?
Thanks very much, Jeannie. Sumud Everyday Resistance, that's an independent production that I made with a visual artist called Brian Jared Duffy. So it's not a Trocaire film, but I do use it as part of my Trocaire work. And this was the background to how the film came about. I had been working a number of years ago as a human rights observer in Palestine with the World Council of Churches. And as part of that work, I would have witnessed a lot of human rights abuse, being done by the Israeli military, Israeli settlers against Palestinian communities. I would have seen a lot of home demolitions, and restrictions on freedom of movement. And I had done a photography exhibition that came out of that work. I had it in Ireland, touring around, but I always wanted to go back and do a short documentary, particularly on the issue of home demolitions, because when I was working there, it was such a, seeing someone's home demolished, it's such a visceral, shocking thing. And, it's not something that we would have, we heard about the conflict in Palestine and Israel, but you don't hear about, you hear about Gaza every now and again being blown to pieces, but you wouldn't have heard really about just kind of almost the suffocation of occupation and things like homes being demolished. That's not going to make the news. So I wanted to kind of raise awareness about that. So I went over with Brian to make this documentary. And as I said, we went to go and make a film about home demolitions. But what the documentary, as you'll have seen, was kind of more, it turned out more about the I suppose the resilience of Palestinians and women in particular, the resilience and steadfastness in challenging the occupation. And yeah, so interestingly, the whole process, when we got there, it wasn't so much about demolitions, but it does feature in it. But I felt when we were there and we met Sausan and Noel, that was the kind of main driving force. I needed to be behind the film, the voices of these women. And, I suppose the key line in it for me is Palestinians continue to smile every day. Like, what I'm glad, what comes out as the focus for the film really is that, they're not just simply victims of human rights abuse. They have resilience, they have strength, and they have their own agency. And it's that's a really important thing for me in the film. So I think that comes across.
Thanks, Emmet. And then can you tell us, I suppose, the same thing, how and why you made Women in Their Place?
Women in Their Place was definitely, from the outset, it was much more explicitly a film about women and women human rights defenders in Honduras. And so this was a Trocaire production. I made this as part of my work and my work in Trocaire. And I suppose the reason the film came about was because Trocaire is campaigning on the issue of business and human rights, trying to raise awareness about the fact that globally, big business is responsible for serious human rights abuses, including attacks and the murders of human rights defenders. Honduras is probably, if not the most dangerous country, one of the most dangerous countries in the world to defend land, defend your community against big business. And Trocaire has a particular interest in raising awareness around the role of women human rights defenders, and I suppose the particular risks that they face being women in defending human rights, standing up against prejudices within their own communities, and that macho culture. So that challenge in itself, but also the added challenges of things like potential sexual violence against women who stand up and challenge human rights abuse. So that's where that kind of film really came about. So there are two films somewhat dealing with the same issue, and that's why we titled this event, Standing Her Ground, but as with different geographical contexts, and differences in the context there. But I think both films do show. They don't present women simply as victims of human rights abuse. They don't present Hondurans or Palestinians simply as victims of human rights abuse, but they have their own agency. They are standing up to defend themselves. And I suppose the importance of international solidarity.
Thanks. And I suppose given your experience making the documentaries and also your experience in campaigns, what role do you think digital media plays in human rights advocacy?
I think it plays a very important role, as you mentioned in my intro. Like, I have a particular interest in using documentary to raise awareness about global justice issues. As an audio-visual medium, it can really engage people. There's no question with that. But I think for me in particular, I see it as a tool for advocacy. I'm not a journalist. I'm not going to, interview all sides in this. I'm very clear in terms of this is about, we take the case of Israel-Palestine. I'm not interviewing an Israeli settler or someone from the Israeli military. This is about advocating on behalf of Palestinians who are suffering and resisting human rights abuses. So for me, it's key, like film, this idea of being able to use it as a tool in advocacy. And I've used both of these films in terms of engaging elected representatives to, get particular arguments across around what needs to happen from international policy point of view to support them. And the way I like to use films, and it's a pity we can't meet in person, but I kind of think there's no point in just putting something up online nowadays that's all completely saturated, loads of different things. I like to actually meet audiences, have discussions, have debates and whatnot. So I think film can play a really key part in that. And in our work in Trocaire, as I've mentioned, kind of engaging elected representatives, what our volunteers often do is they'll use these films and hold local screenings in their parishes, in their communities, or in their universities, and they might invite elected representatives along to have a chat about it, and to get their colleagues or other students to pose questions to the elected representative. Well, how are you supporting the issue of international human rights law or human rights in Honduras or Palestine? So it's kind of I just think it's an extremely useful tool for that.
Thank you. And could you share with us some of the security issues that you had to consider when you were filming both documentaries?
Yeah, sure. I guess the most important thing is always going to be ensuring the safety of the people you're interviewing. Like in both contexts, you're dealing with people who are extremely vulnerable to attack, and you definitely always have to ensure that you have consent and informed consent from the people you're interviewing and featuring, that they know how this documentary is going to be used and why and where it's going to be online, because they need to be completely sure that they're happy to be in it and you're not putting them at greater risk. So in the context of Sumud, I would have linked in with a local NGO called Phobail, which works with the women who featured in the documentary, and kind of made sure that this was all like that. It was definitely appropriate to be featuring their stories, and we would have gone through talking with the women themselves and with women in their place. It was a Trocaire documentary, and Trocaire has a very rigid, a very robust, I should say, way that we will, ensure protection of people that we interview. And we work through local partners who will advise us on that as well. But of course, it's the women themselves that featured in it that were very, very strong in terms of wanting their story to be told. I mean, then as a filmmaker, like just regular things of your own personal security, I tend to film using very kind of minimal amounts of gear, so that kind of helps from a security point of view as well. That's the kind of the main thing. Security is just being aware of your context, aware of what dangers may be there for the people you're interviewing, and mitigating that as much as you can, or just just taking local advice and ensure consent and from the people you're interviewing.
Great, thank you very much, Emmet, and thank you to everyone for joining us today. That's all we have time for. Just before we finish up, we wanted to let you know that you can sign up to Trocaire's mailing list for campaigns, actions and updates. So our campaigns for justice and peace in Israel and Palestine, and on holding companies to account for human rights violations as well. So the link is on your screen. It's trocaire.org/become a campaigner. And as Emmet also said, we have these documentaries and others which we are more than happy to come to your community and to organise a screening once it's safe to do so. So if you're interested in doing that, please get in touch. Thank you very much.